We're definitely not citizens in this country because there is no rule of law. Without the rule of law, you really cannot have citizenship, because the rule of law presupposes that there is equality of all the persons that you find within the space, and everyone is equally subjected to the rule of those laws. Unfortunately, that is not our case in Nigeria. However, nobody is going to give you anything unless you struggle for it. They will not give it to you unless you find a way to come together. If you don't find a way to come together, you are not ever likely to find anyone giving you anything. The Agbado army, the armies, the feudal system I've always used as the police, the army itself. You must find ways to educate them to see the commonalities of our mutual affliction before they might be persuaded to find a way to ensure that we all not only coexist as one, but that we find the common purpose required to win freedom and citizenship for all of us. When they have led him to believe that his problem comes directly from fellow victims and not the system and the ruiners who operate the system that has held him bondage, it is very difficult to then find common purposes when the person with whom you should have aligned yourself, and become one is the person you are seeing as your enemy. So they've given Nigerians enemies when they themselves are the true enemies. Now, when you talk about the Labour Party members who are in the National Assembly and who have completely forgotten how they got there and have aligned themselves with those who have been oppressing us all along, let me explain something. You will notice that during the campaign, before the election, after the election, I've always been very deliberate and careful in explaining that I am not a member of the Labour Party. I have been saying this because I always knew that the problem is not the political party. The problem has always been the system and the politicians who go into the system who become conformed to the system. Executing the program of the political party would have achieved anything is a lie. That was never going to happen. Nigeria is not the way it is because parties have failed to write highfalutin policies, but because men have not sought to change anything. They have been more interested in gaining power so that they are the operators of the oppressive system. So whether they are PPP, PDP, APC, Labour Party, whatever, once they get into the National Assembly, they become, where are the elders? Nigeria, where are the elders? Why would I ask that question? I have found myself observing all manners of abnormalities, anomalies, abominations, things that should not happen, becoming normalized within the Nigerian space. I have found things that should not be seen becoming the norm. I have seen people making excuses for what they should decry. Almost like the elder in that Yoruba proverb, seeing a child with a lopsided head, and instead of straightening the child's head, actually working to make it even more skewed than it is. That is what I have observed in our space. So this has led me to begin to ask questions. When the Yorubas said what were they really saying? They had presumed that the elders that would be found in that space were wise elders, altruistic elders. Who is an elder? Somebody who has seen life, who has been matured by life, who have gained experience, who have stopped being existential in their outlook, who are more considerate, who are tempered by age and by experience, where we are and where we are going. So it now begs the question, where are the elders of Nigeria? This question is pertinent because everywhere you look in the space called Nigeria, every aspect of our national life, from education to healthcare to road infrastructure to security to governance, nothing is suggestive of a people who are blessed with elders. Because nothing about this should be considered normal. Everything in our space is maddening. If they are not killing soldiers in Okwama, it is soldiers that is on reprisal attack in Okwama. If they are not killing policemen in Delta, it is policemen that are busy shooting somebody else. If they are not kidnapping children from schools in Kaduna, it is in Jangabe that they are kidnapping children. If we are not hearing a madman like Gumi telling us how terrorism is a business, you are hearing a government succeeding another government from the same party coming out years after the fact and publishing a list of terror financiers. And then you hear somebody say, how can you be calling somebody terrorist when you yourself, you are a forger, a drug pusher? Where are the elders? These are the questions that comes to mind when you see the madness in the Nigerian space. When you hear about 3.7 billion having been spent to pad the budget, and the same government, the same National Assembly could not find 5 billion for the student loans. But you begin to ask these questions because this is not suggestive of a people who are going anywhere good anytime fast. So you begin to ask this question, and this question has been bothering my mind, and I've had an extra week to consider this. So I asked the question, Nigeria, where are the elders? But it's not full of wisdom. An old idiot, an old fool, an unwise elder. Those are the people we call Agbaya. So even in the Yoruba tradition, there was always a recognition of the fact that some people might be old, but be unwise. So what has happened to us as a people? From the land of the Yorubas to the land of the Ndigos, to Ala Igbo, to the land of the Hausas, to the land of the Fulani, the Kanuris, the Ijos, the Biobio. Where are the elders? Why is the country going to the dogs? Why are young men and women fleeing our country? And you do not hear a whimper from those who should know better, who should be tempered with age, who should understand the temporal nature of the life they are living, because they've lived long enough to have buried brothers, to have buried sisters, some have buried wives, some have buried husbands, some have buried their own children. But they are still fixed on living as though they would live forever. Where are the elders? To point out when things are going wrong, those are the functions of the elders. That is what they are meant to do. But we're in a situation where those who are meant to know better are almost always the ones who behave as miscreants. Let's take, for instance, your Senate President. Akpabio cannot be less than 60. I don't know what his real age is. Let's take again your president. Everything is suggestive of the fact that he's at least 70-something years old. But what are they doing? They are the ones who are constantly bringing evil into our space and normalizing it as though that is the way things should be. Look around Nigeria and tell me if anything in our space is suggestive of a place that is occupied by altruistic elders. The only thing that you hear these elders constantly demanding are self-gratifications. From the judiciary, let's talk about the judiciary. Before you become an appellate court judge, it is assumed that you have proven your brilliance in the lower court. But by the time you get to the Court of Appeal, for instance, you are almost always in your 50s, some in their 60s, and then they begin to gain the numbers. But by the time you get to the Supreme Court, you are almost always in your 60s. So you would imagine that these are persons who should be fixed on posterity. Before you get into the Senate, you're either in your late 40s, if you're actually fortunate to start your political career early, but now that they've turned the Senate into the retirement home of governors, you find that they are almost always in their 60s, in their 70s. This is not suggestive of a space where you should find people scrambling for material acquisition, primitive material acquisition. Akpabio, for instance, has been in governance for over 20 years. He's been a two-term governor. He's been in the Senate before. He's been a minister. How much can you spend in one lifetime? Or has somebody told these people that they can come back a second time? You find men like Gowon, who has been the president of this country in his 20s. And he was so intemperate that he will still be talking about the glorification of genocide. These are the kind of elders that populate the Nigerian space. I'm speaking specifically of Odi. Let me be clear. A court of law, I believe it was the Federal High Court, asked the federal government to pay approximately over 10 billion in damages for what happened in Odi. Now, understand this. The man who led the massacre of policemen in Odi was still strutting around, and I believe he was the head of some vigilante group that was formed during Timi Praise Silva's time as governor. So a murder that had taken place, I believe, since 2000, the murderer, the head of that group, I think some guy named Ken, was not apprehended and killed in questionable circumstances for that matter until about 2009. But multiple innocent people had been wiped out. So if you do not leave a legacy of credible service in your youth, if the community does not recognize you as a good man, altruistic person when you were young, your voice is devalued in your old age. So it is not every elder that preaches good that is listened to. They are more focused on dissipation. In their old age, they are still busy chasing skirts. In their old age, they still want to build mansions. How many rooms can you sleep in one lifetime? They are still chasing cars. They are still consumed by their carnality. The assumption is always that as you grow older, you become tempered. You become focused on the hereafter. You become more inclined to consider the future. Where are the Eshinwaju that the ones behind should follow in Nigeria? Any youth following the aged in Nigeria, those who should be called elders, is lost. They have not left a legacy of good services. They are lacking in vision. The Bible says that the old men shall dream dreams, and the young men shall see visions. The old men in Nigeria have not even allowed the space for the young to envision anything because they've laid no foundation for which anyone might follow. Enough said for one day. It is not about the quantity of hours spent haranguing the system or ventilating anger. It is about the content of what has been said to you.